Hello and welcome to Oh God What Now, the politics podcast that's in a deep hole and is going to dig its way out. The Brehm method, I believe they call it. I'm Andrew Harrison. On today's show, it's been an intense and ultimately exhilarating few days for those of us who relish Conservative candidates losing faces. We'll be talking about the fallout from the Tories' worst local showing in 40 years, plus the surprise defeat of Andy Street in the West Midlands, and the latest straw that Rishi Sunak is clinging to, the idea of a hung parliament. And we'll be looking at Laura Kuenssberg's strange intervention on Saturday when she claimed that the London mayoral race was much closer than expected, even though not a single vote had been counted and there'd been no exit poll either. If political correspondents are going to pull stuff out of their ears just to keep things interesting, then what is the point of political correspondence? And with Monty Panesar standing for George Galloway's Workers' Party, should sportsmen, musicians and actors stay out of politics or get stuck in? Let's say hello to the panel. Marie Leconte is a politics columnist and the author of Escape, How a Generation Shaped, Destroyed and Survived the Internet. Hello, Marie.
Hello.
So we got a lot of locals talk later in the show, but the true caviar moment was Boris Johnson, architect of the voter ID legislation to stop a problem that wasn't really there, forgetting his own voter ID. Are we seeing a bit of a death knell for voter ID, or was he just, doing it to get to the front of the news agenda as usual?
I think so. I was really annoyed about it because I feel like my life currently is one entire game where the only way to lose is to remember that Boris Johnson exists. And as a result, I was very distraught when I had to remember the fact that Boris Johnson existed. I don't believe he did it on purpose. He strikes me as someone who genuinely forgot, probably even forgot he was the one who passed the legislation. Was oh yeah, damn it, that thing again. But yes, no, it was quite interesting. And I was quite taken as well by the story on Twitter of the, I believe, former soldier who brought his, I'm going to really show my knowledge of the army here. He brought his army card to the polling station.
Army card? I'm an army man.
And was turned away. And again, and I feel like people in that line of work tend to probably be the sort of people the Conservatives did not want to disenfranchise.
Yeah, it wasn't supposed to suppress that vote. It was supposed to suppress all the other ones.
Yeah, like we've gerrymandered the wrong people.
The problem with being both corrupt and incompetent at the same time, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very, very tricky. The voice you heard there was Jonn Elledge, Britain's foremost YIMBY. He's building affordable accommodation in your back garden shed right now. And he's the author of A History of the World in 47 Borders, available now. Hello, John.
Hello.
So in housing news, which obviously you hate talking about, Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Brehm wants the government to suspend Right to Buy to allow for more social homes to be built across the country. He says it was the reason the housing crisis got worse every year. Is he right? What can you do about it anyway? And is it a good idea to be photographed in front of Salford Lads Club, as he was?
Oh my God, there's bits to this question I wasn't prepared for. So he's not wrong. It's not the only reason we have a housing crisis. We simply haven't been building enough. The private rental sector has become bigger and is massively underregulated. So there's terrible quality homes out there that people are being charged a fortune for. But it is definitely a factor that, back when Britain did build enough homes, about 30-40% of them were social housing. Since the 1980s, councils have basically not really been allowed to do that, or at least discouraged very heavily. So Andy Brehm actually said that trying to solve the housing crisis is like trying to fill a bath with the plug out, because you try and build new homes, but you lose them at the other end. That is a result of Right to Buy. As it stands, if a council builds a new home, it can be sold from under it at a loss, and the council doesn't get the money and can't put it back into fresh home. It's like you would not take that bet as an investor. So obviously, even if they had the money, which councils currently do not, they would be forced to be investing it in social housing that can just be taken away from them.
Yeah, but this is not something that he can just he can set policy for Greater Manchester.
No, I mean, our mayoralties, which we're going to be talking about more, are pretty weak by international standards. They don't have a huge amount of money floating around the place. But something they are very good at is sort of the bully pulpit function of politics, like standing up and sort of sending a message and kind of getting people around the table and sorting stuff out. And I think Andy Burnham's actually proved over the last 7 years he's pretty good at that stuff.
And he did get photographed in front of Salford Lads Club, which I think is a bit on the nose, isn't it?
You're going to have to help me. Is this from the Smiths album?
It's from the Smiths, John. They were a band.
From the olden days?
From the olden days.
Those are the really olden days, if I don't remember them.
Not that old, good Lord. Before we get started, listeners, a quick tip. If you want to escape the hell of British politics, why not take a trip into the hell of American politics with our brilliant brand new podcast, American Friction. There's 6 months to go to the presidential election, and American politics podcasts tend to go overboard on the wonkery and the inside baseball stuff. So every week, our own Jacob Jarvis and Chris Jones will be joined by Nikki McCann Ramirez of Rolling Stone, plus brilliant guests, to explain what's going on in the election to the British audience. It's out every Friday lunchtime, so you can chase Friday's Oh God What Now with a dose of American friction. There's a link in the show notes. Subscribe, like, share, review on Apple Podcasts, and make podcasts great again. The Conservatives took an absolute pounding in their worst non-general election results in 40 years last week, losing almost half of their 1,000 local council seats and the Blackpool South by-election by an historic swing. They were defeated in 9 out of 10 Metro mayoral contests, including the London one, after an especially dirty campaign here in the capital. And, what seemed to hurt most, they were even beaten for the West Midlands mayoralty, where the very popular and likeable Andy Street had been one of the very few widely admired Tories in the land. Fat lot of good it did him. He went down with the party. Central Office has since taken delivery of emergency qualities of copium. Sunak is claiming that we're heading for a Starmer-led hung parliament, with Labour in coalition with the Liberal Democrats, Greens and the SNP. And one of the standouts of the weekend, as we mentioned earlier, was in the London mayoral election, where the BBC's Laura Kuenssberg tweeted on the Friday night that no votes have been counted yet, so hold on to your hats. But it is clear tonight that the race is much, much closer than some polls had suggested. On what basis, we all wondered, and in the event, Sadiq Khan beat Conservative candidate Susan Hall by 11 percentage points and 250,000 votes. John, we're all journalists, so we know that you have to keep things interesting. You have to accentuate whatever you can possibly build a story on. But she seemed to go a step further and insist on no evidence whatsoever that the election was close when it wasn't. What was going on there?
So it wasn't just Kuenssberg. It's important to say. Like, the first person I saw tweeting that they had a briefing from Conservative Central Office saying, we're chipper this evening. We're pretty confident we're going to hang on Susan Hall, was a former LBC producer.
But that's different. Here I've had a briefing. It's different from saying I am seeing that it's tight when there's nothing to see.
That was the first pebble I saw in the avalanche. So as that went on, that sparked panic. Other people were clearly getting the same briefing. There were a number of politics correspondents out there who were clearly covering their backs, saying, oh, look, I wrote about how Susan Hall could win the mayoral election several months ago. Here's my take. Everyone on the left in this country is prone to paranoia and the sense they're going to lose. Everyone on the right is prone to convincing themselves they're always going to win. So basically the whole of Friday, they weren't counting votes. They were just they were verifying them. So all we were getting was turnout figures. The whole of Friday, there was kind of this sort of head of steam being got up, and everyone was just convincing themselves that this could happen. So I think by the time Laura Kuenssberg actually tweeted that, I think there was just this massive echo chamber effect.
Do you think it was just a misjudgment based on over-reliance of sources then, or, that sort of journalistic need to keep it interesting?
I mean, I think it was a bit of both, wasn't it? I mean, I think she, with the best will in the world, I think she's taken a lot of shit, frankly, from that she doesn't deserve. But I do sometimes feel like she's quite big on what one might term access journalism. She does seem to spend a lot of time reporting what her contacts have told her without necessarily putting it in context. And this did feel like an example of that. But also on that Friday night, there were a lot of people going around saying it does feel closer. Based on absolutely nothing, because we didn't have any figures.
But the difference is, there's one thing being in the pub saying, it feels a bit weird, I don't know, what do you think? And being the BBC's key political correspondent.
She absolutely should not be doing that. I'm not defending it. I'm just saying, this was the last move in a process that had been going on for 24 hours by then.
So what I find really interesting about Laura Kuenssberg is that she seems kind of stuck in an old version of Twitter. So if you look, and especially if you talk to kind of BBC politics people, one of the reasons why she got the job at BBC Poled, which was a very long time ago now, was because she was actually one of the first political journalists to be quite present on Twitter and be very fast and very quick and kind of post rumors and just kind of had a real presence online. And it's kind of, at least the belief is that that's one of the reasons why she got that job, and that felt like a big appointment. But the problem is that it feels like she's been kind of stuck on ice since then, even though Twitter has changed a lot. Twitter is no longer the place where people just post whatever rumor they want because it doesn't really matter. Twitter actually matters more now, I think, than it did, say, 10 years ago. And I think that is a problem. She's still posting in that old way. The other thing I would say is that also, I think the slight missing piece of the puzzle here is that a lot of journalists are in WhatsApp groups together. And those WhatsApp groups discuss nothing but Susan Hall and, oh God, is it actually happening, for an entire day? Because I know that I also managed to drive myself into a frenzy talking to friends because we were all in kind kind of overlapping, I would argue, like WhatsApp groups as well of journalists all going, do we think it could? Oh God, do we think? So it was just mass hysteria kind of, in the hidden WhatsApp groups. And then that would end up tumbling onto Twitter.
But that's the point though, isn't it? It shouldn't tumble onto Twitter because if you're
I did not. I kept my madness in the WhatsApp groups.
Absolutely,
thank you very much.
I was being told to go out and stop looking at the internet by mutual friends who were terrified about the state of my mind. But I did not tweet any of this, and I'm not the BBC political
look at us, a gold star for the two of us.
Yeah. Aren't we good?
Koonsberg bashing is a bit of a national sport, isn't it? She's a Tory plant. She's remote control from central office. There was a kind of, some of the more intemperate voices were wanting her sacked for a tweet. But do you think it's fair to say that, like, media had a pretty bad set of elections this time around?
Oh, completely dreadful. I mean, the job of the BBC political editor is basically to say, here is what the government is thinking. That is to a large extent the role. But it does feel like the Conservatives as a party have worked out how to game this. The Times' front page on Monday was, hung Parliament going to happen, says Sunak, or words to that effect, that is not what the figures show. That's not where we're going. But because the Prime Minister said it, it is there without context that you'd have to get to like par 27 to see or something.
Marie, what is even the point of the Conservatives pretending that a poll is close when the voting is closed? Nothing you say can control the result. It's Schrodinger's vote right now. The result's going to be what it's going to be. Is it just like muddy the waters and hope that somehow produces some benefit you can't predict?
I'm really not convinced it was actually a strategy, because I think normally the kind of received wisdom in elections that you do expectation management. So what you do is going, well, I think, we are going to lose by 100,000 million votes. And anything better than that, we'll be thrilled. My God, because you're not going to lose by all those votes, etc. That was exactly the opposite, which does not work. So I'm really not convinced at all that was a kind of proper, people around a big table in CCHQ going, what's the plan here? What's our play? I suspect that it was just kind of people running their mouths a bit.
Yeah.
I don't see. I may be wrong. I think weird things have happened to the Conservative Party over the past decade, but
it's worth saying that first tweet that I think started it all, there was a follow-up to it literally 15 minutes later saying that someone else in Conservative Central HQ had come back and said, no, that's not true. That's not how we're feeling. But by then it was too late.
Yeah.
So I think it is at least possible that it was just one guy running his mouth off.
Yeah.
So you're in mourning for the end of Susan Hall's campaign. You're
England's
enjoying
race.
it so much. You're always in our hearts. Are the Conservatives ever going to win London when the National Party runs against London as a concept and makes crap horror films about it, and then runs a candidate which somehow managed to be worse than Sean Bailey and seemed to actively dislike everywhere that wasn't Zone 6?
Oh, I think they really could. I think Sadiq Khan this election was entirely beatable. If they'd actually put up a genuine candidate who maybe had, and obviously that's the big problem, right? So they needed someone who probably had a bit of name recognition, was unlike the National Tories, and actually liked London. But I think that could have been possible. Again, Andy Street first won at a time when the Tories were very much not a kind of Andy Street flavoured, party at a national level. So I think lots of Londoners are clearly not particularly thrilled about Sadiq Khan because he's not done a whole lot, etc. I think, he's okay, but I'm not convinced that he's great. But no, I think it was just a really weird failure of selection. But no, I absolutely think, Boris Johnson won twice. It's not, I don't believe that London is an inherently Labour city. It's just that they've kind of given up on it for some puzzling reason.
But because it's the dirty carpet that can be beaten for the benefit of the rest of the country, we don't like that London.
I think it was that, but also I think it's worth looking at the selection process was really weird. So you had some decent people like Paul Scully, who's Tory MP and who used to be the Minister for London, who's, again, not the most thrilling person who's ever, stepped foot in the Palace of Westminster, but he's all right. And that's someone, and I think understandably, he's gone actually since the election, gone a bit like, I probably would have done a bit better than that, lads. It's just putting it out there. So yeah, I think it was just a really weird botched selection process. It's very, very boring, but here we are.
Let's talk about that hung Parliament. It's all based on a Sky report around the national equivalent vote, which I'd never heard of before, extrapolating votes in the locals to a national scale. Number 10 grabbed onto this like a drowning man grabs a straw. It does sound odd to kind of use votes in a partial vote elections which took place disproportionately in urban England, outside London. About half of the voters who will vote in the general election are not going to didn't get to vote in the locals. Hasn't got Scotland in it. Tell me, John, what's your take on the hung parliament idea?
It's not going to happen, is it? I mean, like, if you actually kind of look at, we had one parliamentary election on Thursday. We had the by-election in Blackpool, where there was a 20-point swing against the Tories to Labour. And the overwhelming message of these elections was basically get the Tories out. You can't directly compare local elections to general elections because different geographies is up, and also like it is possible to in a lot of local seats it makes sense to vote for a Green or a Liberal Democrat or an independent candidate. Those guys are not going to be competitive in a general election. So firstly, like the national predicted share was being extrapolated from a limited geography, like we can't see big trends in places like Scotland, which will probably help Labour. And secondly, there are different voting patterns anyway. So I think the Tories are obviously latching onto this because if they can say, well, we're only 9 points behind, that is, for the first time in literally years at this point, I think, that is a smaller gap than there was at the 1997 election. So it does suggest some hope. But this is not the voting pattern we're actually going to see when they eventually press the button.
Yeah, it's like we're 9 points behind if you kind of squint really hard and turn your head sideways and hold up your fingers in front of your face.
And ignore the parliamentary by-election,
Yeah. Marie, the Greens and the Lib Dems got pretty wound up that they won loads of seats. Lib Dems took an extra 100 seats, up to 522. The Greens took 74, taking up to 181 in the local elections. And who gets interviewed afterwards? Reform and Braverman. It's going for the story again. Is this, a particularly egregious example of we've got to have the sparks and the excitement on the screen rather than like, here's a Green person from, a small town somewhere. We can have Braverman kicking off.
I have several opinions about this. The first one is that I broadly agree with you, and I think people are always more likely to go kind of like towards the right to go, oh no, what do they make of this? Even though they're not really gaining any votes. My second opinion is that actually there is probably a point kind of bringing up Reform because Reform are a much bigger threat to the Conservative Party than to Labour, and they may depending on how many people vote for them at the general election and where those people are, I think we could see the difference between the Tories losing a bit badly and the Tories losing very, very, very badly in a way that I think, you could argue that about the Lib Dems to an extent, but definitely not the Greens. My third opinion, which is slightly rogue, is that if I were the Lib Dems, I would absolutely relish this because I think, what they've been doing, the Lib Dems kind of thing over the past few years, which is not stupid, is that, you rarely see them on the national level. But that means that every by-election, every kind of local thing, they're able to just run very localized campaigns with quite different slogans and, and they nearly stand for different things, etc. They very much tailor their message and their campaign to whatever bit of Britain they happen to be standing in. If I were them, I would not want to have to come up with a coherent national platform because I'm not convinced that they have one so far. And also, if they did that, they would probably start losing in some places or etc. So again, I don't understand why they. If I were the Lib Dems, I'd be like, oh no, definitely no, don't invite us. Oh.
Why not here? I like your stealth politics idea. Sort of,
But that's why they've been. They just do by-elections, and that's that.
This is the grinding noise you can hear is John thinking about different Lib Dem campaigns saying, "Don't build any houses here," because
a lot of the younger Liberal Democrats are very much in favour of building houses, but unfortunately they don't have any power. I was wondering on the BBC thing, to what extent is it the work of Robbie Gibb? Who used to work for Theresa May and whose job it seems to be to kind of make sure the BBC is as unbiased, by which he means right-wing, as possible. Like he has been having an influence on the news agenda down there, hasn't he?
Yeah. I like him better when he's in the Bee Gees. You win again. No, that is a recurrent sort of fear, isn't it? That in the depths of the BBC, a thing has been embedded that's not going to be dislodgeable.
Yeah, I mean, like it's still slightly surprising to me that he survived the whole Gary Lineker thing in spring 2023. Like his position seemed pretty compromised then, but somehow he didn't get sacked.
Let's talk about Andy Street, for whom everybody felt a bit sorry.
Yeah,
because he seems like he's like the one decent guy. He's the 2024 Rory Stewart, isn't he? He's the Tory it's okay to like.
Yeah,
and it was that was extremely close.
It was about 1,500 votes, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And, Andy Street has been mayor of the region for 7 years. His Labour opponent, now the Labour mayor, Richard Parker, is no one in particular. I don't think anyone's ever heard of him, possibly including within the region. He's kind of a Labour Party backroom boy. And it was purely sort of national swing that got Andy Street. Like, it's very difficult to kind of hang on in a sort of wave election against the Tories. But I do think he did himself proud with his concession speech, where he did the proper sort of congratulate his opponent, like say they've been a privilege to serve, and all the things you're kind of meant to do, and kind of remind people that he's not a bad guy. I disagree with him, but he seems like a decent enough human being. And I think certain other Tory mayors or mayoral candidates could maybe learn something from that.
Are you talking about my favourite person in the entire world, Susan Hall?
I am talking about Susan Hall,
God.
who basically just stood there spitting fire about the fact she'd lost, said it wasn't fair.
Did you notice as Khan made his acceptance speech, she was doing some fantastic eyebrow acting because she stood next to him. The eyebrow, they were being raised right round to the back of her head every time he mentioned any kind of achievement.
Think of what we could have had. Just that every day in London.
Yes, would have been terrifying. Marie, looking at the Conservative Party overall.
So I was speaking to some number 10-ish people over the weekend, and that was really interesting because they were like, well, we were kind of expecting the Barbarians to be at the gate by now, but the Barbarians are not at the gate because they seem to have realised that, they don't have anyone else to put on the throne. So I guess we're kind of here. Yeah, no, but I didn't know.
Are they heard of this Starmer guy?
no, but as in
He's been around for a while.
The Barbarians being the kind of nutters in the Conservative Party, to be fair.
Those Barbarians.
Yeah.
Okay. Wrong Barbarians, Andrew.
There was so many stories saying, they're going to move straight after the local elections and they're going to topple Rishi. There's going to be the letters sent to Sir Graham Brady. There's et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then, and I think there was definitely a bunker mentality in number 10 going up to the local elections. And then nothing happens. They're a bit like... I
don't fully understand why nothing has happened because
they've realised they don't have another person, and also it would be. But even if you chat to Tory MPs, they're like, "I could not sell. We've got a new Prime Minister on the doorstep."
so I did cynically wonder if, there was a set of local elections a couple of years ago where, they were quite bad for the Tories, but all the ones that came in on the first day were quite bad for Labour. So that kind of set the narrative. And even though it had been an absolute disaster for the government, that was not how it was talked about. So my cynical, not so much a theory as a question, is when that guy in number 10 or CCHQ, or wherever he was, who clearly just didn't understand the spreadsheets, was briefing friendly journalists saying actually, we think we've won. Was that, in fact, not an incompetent inability to understand numbers? Was that, in fact, a very clever attempt to kind of set the narrative and make sure that for an entire day, instead of talking about Tory failure, we were all talking about the possibility the Tories could hold London?
Oh, I don't hate that.
Everything's 4D chess, though, if you turn your head sideways.
I mean, I do worry I'm slightly giving them more credit they don't deserve here. It doesn't kind of fit with anything else about their management of the country.
To an extent, though, I mean, it kind of doesn't matter what we think. What matters is what's the kind of brain engine room of the Toryverse thinks. And taking a look at, into that particular abyss, Sherelle Jacobs in The Telegraph is very starry-eyed. She's run a piece today headlined, "Furious Tory voters now want to destroy the party that betrayed Britain." And I had to quickly check which one she meant. And she does mean the Conservatives. She said, "The Red Wall has completely lost patience because the Tory party hasn't delivered Tory policies." John, is the Telegraph perilously close to getting it and realising that people don't dislike the Conservative Party because they're not Tory enough? They dislike the Conservative Party because 14 years.
No. No, it's not. I read this. You made me read this column. Here's a key line. "A view has crystallised that the ruling party has not only cataclysmically violated the spirit of conservatism, but that this has wrought damage on the country on a scale that is truly awesome. The problem, they think, is that the government has not been conservative enough." Now, I personally would say that most people out there in the world do not see politics through that lens. They are concerned about the fact that, everything is shit. Public services are falling to bits. They can't get a GP appointment. Their school roof is falling down. They haven't had a pay rise in 14 years. The government, through all this, is being self-obsessed and occasionally corrupt. I think this has very little to do with the fact that they've not been proper Tories.
Yeah.
But that is nonetheless the line the Telegraph have decided to spin. The real problem is proper conservatism has never been tried.
Yes, that's true. It's very hard to turn up in the rubble of a collapsed concrete school roof and say, you know what this needed?
Free
more
markets.
conservatism in that. Not enough conservatism in your concrete, mate. You've mixed it wrong. Marie, just to wrap up this bit, as we've said, challenges to Sunak are now off the table as they've realised they haven't got anybody to do the job. So the Braverman right are going to make Sunak own the results. What that means, I'm not entirely sure, but is any of this going to make any difference to the timing of the election? We sort of think we know what the result of the election is going to be.
No.
No?
No. I genuinely think, again, nothing like that. There's nothing Rishi can do at this stage to change anything. I wish I had more to say, but genuinely, I just could not think of a single thing he could do.
Do you think that the government has passed the event horizon?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. They just rely at this stage on Keir Starmer somehow doing something like insane.
The wild, unpredictable nature of Keir Starmer, of course, we can't rule anything out.
Yeah.
That guy could do anything.
So, Bear Korma, yeah.
Now it's time for heroes and villains. Who has been admirable this week and who has been dreadful this week? Marie Leconte, who are you nominating?
So my hero is Chris Hellenger, who died this week at 38. She got diagnosed with breast cancer in her 20s, and then spent over a decade campaigning for women, for people of all genders, to really check their breasts, to get diagnosed early, etc. And I think it's just an incredible legacy. I think thousands of people are presumably alive now because of her.
Yeah, she created the Copperfield charity.
She did, yeah. So incredible woman. And my villain is Kemi Badenoch. Specifically for introducing a law that says that all new non-domestic buildings in England must have single-sex toilets. Is that really the priority at the moment in Britain, in England rather? I don't know. It just really infuriated me. I think it makes life more rubbish for trans people, makes life probably more rubbish for lots of businesses, but also, come on, priorities.
Okay, fair enough. John, what have you got?
I mean, I'm going to lower the tone. I'm not going to lie to you. For my hero, I was going to go with North Yorkshire Council.
Okay.
Because they're phasing out apostrophes on street signs. And
as a hero?
As someone who has had to spend a lot of time writing about the urban form, it's intensely irritating that sometimes there's an apostrophe and sometimes there isn't. If there's just a rule, it makes it much easier, and it also will be easier for computer systems to deal with as well. And I'm enjoying the look on your face.
What the hell are you two? Who cares about what the computers think? These are apostrophes, are part of our heritage. Are you mad?
Oh, so we're pounds, shillings and pence, but we're coping without them.
So every time you go through King's Cross, do you get the heebie-jeebies?
Does it matter? Does it make any difference? Are you not going to know whether or not you're in the right station because there's an apostrophe or not? No, you are not. Is there an apostrophe in St James's Park? You're not sure.
More than
There
that,
is.
I kind of don't care about St James's Park. Who's your villain?
Southern Water.
Okay.
Because the water for large chunks of the Sussex town of Hastings has been out for several days. When it eventually came back on, it was brown. And there are reports going round that the problem is they got permission to replace a pipe some years ago and just didn't
bother.
Just didn't do it.
Okay, well, quite obviously, your apostrophe madness is not going to get the hero of the week. So it's going to Chris Hellenger of Copperfield, so a victory for Marie. But I'm afraid the villain is going to John for Southern Water for making the people of Hastings have to boil brown water to make a cup of tea. Absolutely disgraceful. I feel we'll be seeing them again at some point in the future. Former England cricketer Monty Panesar will stand for George Galloway's Workers' Party of Britain in the Southall constituency when the general election comes round. He says he wants to represent the working class people of this country. His campaign didn't get off to a good start when he admitted to Times Radio that he didn't know what NATO was, even though it's the policy of Galloway's party to leave the organisation. Former Armed Forces Minister James Heappey said it was a shame to see him reduced to this. Panesar's unlikely to win. Labour's defending a 21% majority in Southall. But should we be so dismissive of non-politicians who want to get into politics? We're always saying how professional politicians are the bane of our lives, and Glenda Jackson and Michael Cashman, for instance, were actually pretty good. Musician politicians include Pete Wishaws of Runrig, who's been an SNP MP since 2001, and, little-known facts here, the Tory MP for Morecambe and Lonsdale, David Morris, who was played in Rick Astley's band, written for Stock Aitken and Waterman, and was shortlisted to be a session player in Whitesnake. Beat that, Tony Blair. So should there be a bit less stick to the sport, stroke music, stroke acting, and a bit more, you couldn't possibly be worse than Chris Grayling. Marie, you stalk the corridors of power. Would a cricketer be more use than somebody who went straight from PPE to SPAD to Parliament?
I think I have a very long answer to this, which I will not bore you with. But the slightly shorter version, I think the problem is that you kind of ideally in the House of Commons you need both. I think you do need the people who were born and bred in Westminster, know everything about policy making, about how to make stuff happen on Whitehall, etc., and who understand the politics of the Commons. You also kind of need the mavericks and the people who did not know about politics at all beforehand and stuff. And I think a mix of all those kinds of people is what would make the perfect House of Commons. The problem is, and especially now we have more kind of like individualized local MPs and we have higher expectations of local MPs. No one actually wants, either end. That no one wants the person who was born and bred on Whitehall. No one wants the maverick who has no idea about politics, which I think is making the House of Commons as a whole worse because we end up in that weird thing where everyone's a bit in the middle, like maybe a councillor for a bit.
But a maverick does not have to be someone who knows nothing at all about politics. I mean, we have seen people come in from elsewhere who maybe are not schooled in the way the House works, but have strong political instincts and also have, a kind of connection with the electorate who know what voters are like.
Oh, no, absolutely. Again, I was agreeing that we need more people like that in Parliament. But again, I think, and I think we'll talk about it in a bit, it is very hard to get them into Parliament. And I think it's also quite hard to tell the difference between people who have never worked formally in politics and will be great at it and people who will come in and just get overwhelmed and actually be a bit shit. Because it is such a weird, unique world.
But I mean, this division between like politicians and non-politicians feels like quite a modern phenomenon. Like once upon a time, you did used to have a much more diverse House of Commons with people drawn from, the trade union movement and the professions and so on. Like this sort of route from, Oxford PPE, SPAD, MP is a function of the last 25 years, really, isn't it?
It's Blair. Like, a lot of it is Blair.
Yeah.
Well, I did a bit of a scout, and there's a handful of actors and there's a handful of comedians, and there's millions of sports people, like going back decades. And obviously, this connects to where we used to the number of first-class cricketers that you see listed who've been MPs over the past 150 years or whatever is vast because they came from those kind of schools and continue to come from those kind of schools. I mean, when you look in more recently who's gone into politics from the creative areas, there's a few actors, Giles Brandreth or Tracy Brehm, and there's a handful of musicians. I mean, Dave Rowntree from Blair is standing again, and maybe one day he'll get in. Eddie Izzard continues to stand. Do you think that, possibly it's not just the kind of schooling that elite MPs and the ruling class in the past will have had, but also that maybe the kind of win at all costs mentality and don't think too hard about it is what makes sportsmen more likely to stand?
I think there probably is a level of like grit and determination and just kind of a willingness to kind of keep slogging away. That's a factor. I also wondered if you've just listed a bunch of actors and sports people. They're performers. Like they're people onto whom something can slightly be projected as well. Like they're slightly blank slates in a way. I kind of think like, someone who writes their own material as a pop singer or something is not quite the same. So I do wonder if it's something about someone who can kind of be molded into a slightly different role. Maybe is in there as well.
There's another aspect of the kind of, not just in terms of who stands and who gets to be, gets selected and gets to be an MP, but there seems to be a kind of right-left demarcation on who's allowed to talk about politics, right, out in the world. So anybody in the arts who makes a statement about politics immediately gets buried under stick to the music, stick to the acting, stick to the comedy, stick to the football. But when it's, Roger Daltrey or Ringo Starr or Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden talking about Brexit, well, that's fine. Why is it that, it's okay to intervene in politics from a creative background if you're doing it from the right, but not from the left?
So there was once a man called Paul Dacre.
Oh, yeah. But that can't just be the only reason, yeah.
I do think it's the main reason, I have to say. Like I was like Marie's just done it a lot more succinctly than I was going to. But yeah, it's like when people express right-wing opinions, they're kind of salt of the earth working classes saying what the nation really thinks. When they express left-wing ones, it's because they're overprivileged, cappuccino drinking wokerati.
But I do think actually something shifted with the Brexit campaign because usually I think the country was quite split. So you would have celebrities who are Labour backing and celebrities who are Conservative backing. I think Brexit was one of those where actually nearly every celebrity was Remain backing.
Yes.
And I think all the Brexit newspapers as a result were like, well, no, shush,
But it actually
and they've never stopped.
It wasn't even that they were told to shut up. It was that they were intimidated and didn't speak in the first place. And I know this. I've talked to bands who are very, very anti-Brexit, and they were just told, look, your fans won't like this. They will immediately say, shut up and stick to the music. Who do you think you are to tell us what's about? And this are often musicians whose music is incredibly Europhile.
Yeah.
You know, show me a band who isn't, absolutely interested from their own self-interest as well as from the arts in being able to tour wherever. And they felt preemptively silenced, not just that they would say something and get slapped down. And that worried me.
I think the flip side as well is that you're seeing a lot with the younger generations online. There's this expectation that all celebrities should be very political, actually. So you've got, so like Taylor Swift had to speak out against Trump around Gaza. There's definitely an expectation now that basically everyone who's famous should be talking about it, etc. So I think that actually celebrities are stuck in a very uncomfortable thing at the moment, where if they speak up about something, then the Daily Mail will kind of hit them with a big stick. And if they don't, then their fan base will hit them with a big stick. So there's no way to win anymore.
No point in being famous. Who would you like to see from a non-traditional background be an MP?
So he's definitely been in the UK for a very long time, but I don't actually know if he's got citizenship. But if not, I'm sure that can be arranged. I would love, and that is a sincere thing. Like, I'd love to see Nick Cave in the House of Lords or in the House of Commons. I think he's a really interesting guy, and I think the way he writes about faith and about community, etc., are really interesting. I think he would actually work cross-party. Like, he's not instinctively just very left-wing and tribal. Yeah. Clearly very clever. I think Nick Cave.
Yeah, I like that idea. John, what do you think?
I have two answers. One of which is, we've been talking about how, the press do silence people expressing views from the left, and that's true. But also, if you're kind of doing this sort of this more cartoonish version of fighting evil people, then sometimes you can win a lot of support. So I'm going to suggest Marcus Rashford once his football career is done, because I think he did.
So now then.
Yeah.
I don't know about football. I'm in the wrong segment. I was terrified when I saw we were talking about this. But yeah, he did a sterling job of kind of keeping that campaign going and not being intimidated. That was not a football pun, but I got the reference.
Yeah,
I did done. The other person I was going to suggest, who we know is a Labour supporter, who's done some party political broadcasts, who is very popular, very liked, is David Tennant. He's very charismatic, and it would stop them from putting him in everything.
This is true. Well, my votes, boringly, are going to be somebody who has shown leadership, the ability to bring people together, has a great sense of humour, also makes you feel like you are, that good things can happen, and who crucially is really liked by his opponents. Slight problem being that he's German, but Jurgen Klopp. Beautiful,
I respect that,
teeth beaming across. And he would, no matter what's happening, even our season is fizzling to nothing, and we sort of still love him. He kind of has that good energy.
Nice.
We've reached the end of the show, which means it's time for Escape Routes. What are the books, films, music, plays, fondue recipes, or whatever else that have enabled our panel to keep their shit together for the past week or two? John, what is your escape route?
So I've been watching from the beginning a little-known show called The Simpsons.
Oh yeah,
which is proper comfort zone stuff. But it's bringing me so much joy, and I've not watched it properly since probably the 90s. So I don't know if anyone out there's heard of it, but I would recommend that.
Well, have you started from the beginning?
I have. You have to get through about 12 episodes that are a bit rubbish, and then it gets good.
In the very early days when Homer is basically Walter Matthau.
Yeah, for a start, they just try and do a sort of normal family sitcom that happens to be animated. And then they realise they can do references and make it surreal, and it gets much more interesting. But yeah, it's worth doing.
Interesting. Marie?
Oh, God. I have been watching A Gentleman in Moscow, which I think is generally about to become one of my favourite TV series of all time. So it's adapted from a novel, limited series on Paramount. And it tells the story of this Russian count who moves back to Russia in 1922. Well, I think that the story picks up in 1922, where for plot-related reasons, he is condemned by the Bolsheviks to spend the rest of his life locked in the Metropole Hotel, which is this grand hotel, and he can't leave. He's in prison in this hotel. And it's just 8 episodes, basically, of his life in that hotel with the kind of guests that come and go and stuff. And it's that mix of his life not fundamentally changing a whole lot, but also you kind of get the life in Russia, obviously changing a great deal outside the kind of doors of the hotel. He's played by Ian McGregor. he's genuinely one of the most charming. I think I genuinely have a crush on him. And I feel like I'm 13 having a crush on a fictional character. But like the entire cast is amazing. It's incredibly charming. The costumes are amazing. And it's kind of, it's quite subdued, but also quite like quietly melancholic. And yeah, no, it's, I could continue for so long. Like, I've got a whole bit on my Substack this week on that. If people read it, it'll be out on Friday. But yeah, obsessed with The Gentleman in Moscow.
Well, mine, and I'm probably the last person in the world to start watching this, is the fantastic series The Dry, which is on ITVX. And it is an Irish TV series, a comedy drama in which a character, Shiv Sheridan, played by Racine Gallagher, returns home because she has accepted that she is an alcoholic and cannot live in London anymore, and that she's wrecked her life. And she goes home to Dublin to rebuild her life. And we meet her equally dysfunctional and entertaining family, which includes the fantastic Kieran Hines as the dad. You recognise him from Game of Thrones. This is just such a clever, acute, well-written, beautifully acted comedy. It's got a real sharp edge. There's a lot of pain and fear and guilt in it. It has been rather tritely described as an Irish Fleabag. It's not about the same things that Fleabag is about. There's a lot of sort of personal damage in there, but it's just an extremely clever, funny, dark, and enjoyable piece of comedy. And I'm powering through it. So that's The Dry on ITVX. Heartily recommended. And that's the show. So thank you, John.
Thank you.
And thank you, Marie.
Thank you.
Listeners, don't forget to check out American Friction. There's a link in the show notes and a brand new episode this Friday. After our theme tune, Demon is a Monster by Corner Shop, we will have the traditional shout out to our army of generous supporters. You too could join their hallowed ranks and get the podcast early and without ads, plus a lot more when you sign up to support us. Search Oh God What Now Patreon or follow the link in the show notes to find out how. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Hello and welcome to the Oh God What Now Conspiracy 2. Tony Salter, Sue Feichter, Richard Warner and Jack.
Many thanks from me for your generosity to Jeanette King, Nicola Lang, Sean Williams and Murray Tiptop.
And finally, a big shout from me, and thanks for finding a few quid down the back of the settee, to Alex Boer, Jackie Harvey, Stephen Allen, and returning prodigal son, Nick Avery. Thanks for your backing. We'll see you all next time.